Who are you? Beneath the expectations, the labels, and the societal conditioning, what does it truly mean to become you? I'm Fleming, the founder and lead practitioner of Becoming You. I created Becoming You out of a desire to share my own experience of becoming myself and to support others who are curious about who they are. From a young age, I have been driven by a desire to figure out who I am, why I'm here, and how I can belong while being myself. This is Becoming You, the podcast. Conversations about uncovering, embracing, and being your true self. A place where I dive deep into what it means and what is required to live life as your most authentic self. Through real, honest, and grounded conversations with professionals and people who are walking the path. If you're curious about identity, authenticity, and personal freedom, your own or others, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Martin, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back. It's great to see you again, John. Thank you.
Likewise. For anybody who hasn't listened to the conversation Martin and I had in season 1, I recommend that you go back and listen to that now first before coming back to this episode, because I think there will be a bit of a continuation of some of the things that we've talked about.
Yes.
And it might be helpful to listen to it in that order. So Martin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Martin Duffy here. I'm the director of the Irish Centre for Shamanic and Transpersonal Studies in Dundee Park in County Meath. I have a background, 35 years in mental health in the HSC, trained in psychotherapy, regular humanistic, also Jungian, studied with Stanislav Grof in holotropic breathwork, and spent some time with indigenous shamans all over the world, learning from the real teachers in this world and the other world, which I would see the ones in the other world are the ones where we really learn. So I have a strong interest in Jungian psychology, but mostly the shamanic way, getting back to nature, communicating with the elemental spirits. And so it's a mix of, academia, mainstream kind of psychiatry, psychology. And then most of my learning has come from experiential experiences with meditation and particularly with shamanic journeying, whether it be with plant teachers or with the drum. So I'm still working on all that. I'm still learning. I'm still a neophyte when it comes to, learning the work. So it's good to be here with you today, John, and taking this conversation on to another level.
Yeah, likewise. So Martin, same as last time, we've got a question to get us going. So the previous guest question is: biases, privileges, and ignorance can cause untold and unseen harm. What steps do you take to address, deconstruct, and mitigate this in your work?
Well, it's down to one thing really, which is doing our shadow work. Jung said that if we want to do anything to help the world, withdraw our own projections from it. And what he meant was doing our own shadow work, because we all contain complexes and coexes within our own unconscious, which may be formulated by our early upbringing in our family, from the birth trauma, from the time in the womb, or indeed from other lifetimes. So we're all operating at a surface level, at the ego level. And, whatever you think, whatever you believe, whatever your biases are, your likes or dislikes, are predicated by what you're unconscious of. So, I have a thing about people speaking in absolutes where they think they know things. We know nothing. We know a fraction of ourselves, never mind everybody else. And nowadays I see more and more people less and less inclined to doing their own psychological inner work. And what we see is a lot of projections being flung around the world, and people say, I'm triggered by this or I'm triggered by that, without taking into mind that their triggering really is activation. It's activation of their own complexes, of their own unconscious shadow aspects of themselves. But, you see it all over social media that people just fling their projections around the place and blame everybody else for the stuff. They won't take it on board and work it in that alchemical engagement with their own woundedness and sort themselves out before they go out there and have biases or prejudice or projections onto other people. So do your inner work is the key. And that's hard work, but that's why so many people don't want to do it. It's as my guides would say to me some time ago, the hard way is the easy way. And the easy way is the hard way. Meaning that the hard work of inner work puts you up to spend time looking at your dreams, being in therapy, doing your work. What's the easier in the long run, because you're less inclined to be creating a reality around you, which is a mirror of your own unconscious shadow side that's coming back at you through people, situations, and experiences. The easy way is just lie around and blame everybody else and just scroll on Netflix or whatever. And then the hard thing is then you're going to end up with problems because you've created them because you haven't addressed the inner. Like Jung was very clear with this. He said the psychological rule is we meet in life as fate, that which we hold within ourselves. We create our own reality. If you do the inner work, your external world then changes for the better.
I'm curious about something. I don't think we have talked about this head on before, but obviously I come from more of a Freudian background because of my training in transactional analysis.
Yes.
And although there are big similarities across Jung and Freud's thinking in lots of ways, I wouldn't be as familiar with Jung just because of the training I've had. Was there something in particular that pulled you towards Jungian thinking more than anything else?
Yes. His inclusion of the psychospiritual in his therapeutic approach. Jung had a sense that, we were all on a path of individuation, and that our ordinary everyday stuff was an impediment to our growing in consciousness and becoming more aware and more awake. And so he saw that the evolution of the psyche was the evolution of the soul. And when we worked on our inner shadow material, he said that becoming enlightened wasn't about, seeing the light and reading all the books and doing yoga on the beach in Bali at sunset kind of thing. It was bringing the shadow into light. And that meant the hard work of bringing your shadow into consciousness. And then you had your ego, there was an ego self-access. The ego then became a service of the self or the higher self, rather than being just to do with service to self. It became more of service to others as you awakened within yourself. Whereas Freud, and I've studied some of Freud's work, but Freud was far more limited in his view of the human psyche. And he based a lot of his thinking around the sexual impulses. And he couldn't go that extra mile that Jung went. But not only Jung, Wilhelm Reich and Otto Rank and the other renegades who broke with Freud, because Freud and for political reasons too, Freud covered up a lot of his early work around when he was uncovering child sexual abuse in that period in Europe. He covered it all up because it wasn't politically savvy for him to do so, and he got warned off. So he kind of dropped the ball, unfortunately. That's not to say that his work is not invaluable. It's invaluable, very much so, and he was the father of psychoanalysis. We go back and we look at Freud, Jung, or Adler, or any of them, and we see that they're only cycling back to ancient knowledge that was there long before modern civilization was here. You go back to the Gnostics or the ancient shamanic teachings, to Taoism, to the ancient Buddhism. I mean, it's all there, but they put a modern framework on it, and it worked well. And as I say, Freud added a huge amount to modern psychology. But again, I like to think of things from a transpersonal psychology point of view. It's like a rainbow. All these individuals have abandoned the rainbow, as Ken Wilber would say, but none of them have the whole truth. So the transpersonal perspective acknowledges all the previous thinkers and theorists, and it bands them together as a rainbow, and then includes psychospiritual things like, Buddhism, Zen, shamanism, Hinduism. It's a much more complete system. And of course, humanity's in the process of evolution, so psychology. And that's why, to answer your question, that's essentially why Jung appealed to me, was to do with the fact that he acknowledged the soul and the spirit.
I had kind of picked that up, I think, probably at some level, because all of the existential or transpersonal stuff that I have engaged with has come from outside my kind of formal training. There's been a hunger there for it at some level to kind of think, okay, yeah, like looking at the psychological level of things for me is very interesting. Yeah. Like I almost classify myself as a psychologist. I enjoy that area.
Yeah.
But I think looking at only one level is problematic. You get that with the behavioralists as well. They just want to look at behavior as the total understanding of everything, and that you are just your behavior. But, I think there's a lot more, like you said, to be got from looking at the social level, the behavioral level, the psychological level, the existential level, the transpersonal level, because you get a kind of a more full picture and understanding of
Yeah.
self and of reality then.
Yes. I absolutely agree. I mean, be honest with you, I've never been a big fan of academia in that sense, because I saw academia and academics as gatekeepers for the truth. That the system itself uses psychiatry and psychology to dumb down the human spirit and the human soul. So the academia, it's usually dry, it's lifeless in lots of ways. It's all about getting your PhD and you have to jump through all these hoops, and you end up wasting a lot of time and learning nothing of value in the real world. And this is why I was very attracted to Stanislav Grof's work. Because Grof was an academic. He was a professor of psychiatry and PhD or whatever. But he went into the experiential realms, which where the real work is at, as far as I'm concerned, when he started working at LSD-25 in Czechoslovakia, and then moved on to holotropic breath work and incorporated shamanism and all the Jung and all the psychospiritual. Like, for me, Stan Grof is the most brilliant mind of the 20th, 21st century. He took the baton that Jung laid down in 1961, and he took it much further. He includes quantum physics in his work, science, as well as, psychology. But he didn't come from a dry academic place. Like, he worked with death. He wrote a book on death and dying called The Ultimate Journey, because he had worked with people who were dying in hospices using psychedelics and breathwork and shamanism. He wrote on quantum physics. He wrote on all the broad spectrum. And he was one of the founders, actually, of the transpersonal psychological movement. So while he was an academic, he didn't get lost in academia. I see a lot of academics running around today, and the PhDs dripping off them left, right, and center. But, they don't talk any sense whatsoever. It's all about, I'm doctor this, I'm doctor that. And they're too tied up with their credentials. And they're afraid to move out of their nice, cozy little track because they might not get funding or they might not get published. So, and that's why I liked about the renegades, like Freud, Otto Reich, Wilhelm Reich, whatever. They didn't sell out. And they pushed through to bring a therapeutic modality to the world that worked, because their interest was to help people, not just to help themselves. It was more of service to others rather than service to self. So in that sense, I like to, myself personally, sail close to the wind in areas that might be considered controversial. From my perspective, there's nothing off limits. I will look at everything. I will study everything. I'll journey into everything. But I don't believe in anything. I have a sense of being an agnostic. I will gather information, knowledge, and then if it works, like an old shaman up in the Andes told us once, he said, all this stuff is not much good if it doesn't grow corn. The growing of the corn is the effectiveness of the method. If people are getting well because you have a certain way of being with them and you have a certain way of working with them, it doesn't matter what your theoretical background is. And there were studies done on this. The therapist, could have been Freudian, Jungian, or Adlerian, or whatever, but it was their personality and their own presence and their own energy system that was effective in the treatment and healing of the patients.
I'm thinking back to what you said about academics. What I experience a lot of in the world at the moment, and I think this probably applies to academia as well, probably even more so, is a lot of what I refer to as kind of like intellectitis.
Yeah, good word. Yeah, I like it.
Where people it's like they've overdeveloped their intellect, which is really encouraged in the society that we live in, particularly in the West, through schooling and capitalism really likes intellect, keeping people above their neck.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's often not embodied.
Yes.
Like you said, it's dead, it's soulless. Yeah. That's a real problem, because if you're talking particularly, like maybe if you're talking about chemistry or something like that, it's not as needed. But if you're talking about psychology or matters to do with the psyche and the human condition, having a kind of a dead and not embodied approach is problematic in my view.
Absolutely. And the irony is psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry, the operative word there is psyche, which of course means soul. And many of these modalities are soulless, as you say, and they're dry. And, many of these academics, intellectualitis types, have psychophobia. They're afraid of the psyche. They're terrified of their own psyche. They live in this materialistic matrix world where it is for the patient, so-called, I don't like that word either, to do the work while they are the experts on the person's life and their soul and their essence. And it's very dehumanizing in many cases. I saw that in psychiatry when I worked in it for 35 years. Like, much of my work was undoing the damage that the psychiatrists were doing to their patients, in the sense that they would berate them, blame them, over-medicate them. And, people often ask me, why did you stay in there for so long, 35 years? And that's why. Because I felt I had a duty, or indeed a mission, to undo the trauma that the actual medical system, the biomedical system, was causing and damaging people, and still is today. And that's why I created Dundee Park and the Centre here for Shamanic and Transpersonal Studies as an alternative to that sick system. And it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting worse. And that's why I think so many people are reaching out for alternative and different ways of healing themselves. And again, that's what I love about shamanism, is the path of direct revelation. You want to know something, you want to get healing, you go and you check in with your spirit guides, your helpers, with the elementals of nature, journey directly into the collective consciousness, the cosmic consciousness. There you see miracles happen. There you see people, having these numinous experiences and intractable problems shifting over a period of time that the psychiatrists or psychologists will often tell them are incurable. And I, as you have, I'm sure, you've seen that that's not the case.
Yeah, definitely isn't. And I think it takes a lot for an individual to step out of that process as well, because often these people are very vulnerable. Yes. Or perceive themselves as very vulnerable, or the people around them perceive them as very vulnerable. And it can be a tricky dynamic then to assert. I was actually only just talking to somebody last week about the horrible kind of manipulation that can go on in the dynamics between psychiatrists and patients around things like non-compliance of medication, and the kind of accusations that get placed on patients and people I would deem quite vulnerable. And you have to ask yourself sometimes, like, this actually sounds more like abuse than caregiving.
Yeah.
Which is horrible when you think about it. When I was growing up, I had mental health challenges, let's say, for want of a better phrase. I was probably about 14 when they really started to escalate. And in and around 16, there was questions of like, do I have depression? Should I go on an antidepressant? Should I go see a psychiatrist? And I always remember my mum being quite stern about the fact that there was nothing wrong with me. She was really wanting to emphasize that how I was feeling was valid, but that it was, from her perspective, a temporary reality. And how she absolutely did not want me to take medication and go see a psychiatrist. And I look back on that now, remember at the time thinking, God, why is she being like this? Like, I want to get better and I want to feel better, and these people are offering us help, and why is she saying no? But actually, I look back and I think how lucky I am that I didn't go that route, because often it can be quite hard to get out of it once you get into it.
Yes. You were very blessed to have such an enlightened mother, obviously very tuned in, because she was absolutely right. I saw it happen to people. They get into the system and put on medication, and if they try to get well, that's seen as a sign of insanity. So when they act sane, they're considered insane. And it's like what Krishnamurti said, there's no measure of sanity to be well adjusted to an insane society. And I remember as a community mental health nurse, and I had trained in psychotherapy, the psychiatrists would reluctantly refer their patients to me for therapy. I trained in CBT and then other formats. And I remember, in one instance, I was well into a process with a particular client, and the psychiatrist said, he's not taking his medication anymore, so I want you to stop therapy with him. And I absolutely point blankly refused. I said, that's unethical. And the fact that he's not taking medication is an indication he's getting well and he's doing well in therapy. And you want me to stop therapy because he won't obey your rules and regulations? I said, there's no way I'm doing that. That's unethical. And I said, I won't be doing it. And if that's the way you feel about it, stop referring your patients to me. Now, in fairness to her, she knew she had no choice. But it was a constant battle in there for me. to fight against the system. I remember way back in the 1980s, I started nursing in 1977, being castigated and ostracized by the psychiatrist because I had the audacity to train as a counselor and to look at developing different methods of treating people other than just electroconvulsive therapy, which was at the go at the time, and medication. But that rebellious spirit was always there. It always will be. I've always fought the system and always will, for the person and for myself. And over time, fortunately, I was able to gather a small group of other nurses around me, and we began to train in therapy, and we began to introduce it into the system. And it made a huge difference. I mean, we saw results where people have been locked up in back wards of hospitals, and we were able to get them rehabilitated back into the community. And then I worked with Ivor Brown in St. Brandon's, the great Irish psychiatrist. And he and I worked in what we call the church project. We were doing breathwork and psychedelic therapy in some instances with the people in the psychiatric patients. And again, that really heartened me because I saw the results that would happen for people. You give them a little bit of love, kindness, compassion, and you listen to them and you work with the soul essence. Many of these so-called patients were highly advanced souls, like we were talking about earlier. These were souls that just didn't fit into the system, and this particularly 3rd-D reality was a horrendous place for them to be in. They're often very intuitive. In indigenous cultures, they would have been the shamans of those cultures. As Maladama said, the African shaman, when he came to the West, why do you lock all your shamans up in psychiatric hospitals? So rather than seeing people as abnormal, I began to see that these people were advanced in many different ways. And I see that more and more now as I study it further these days.
That's a kind of a good segue, actually, because in a way, we're seeing history repeat itself at the moment. In last 4 or 5 decades, there was institutionalization. People with schizophrenia or so-called schizophrenia were being treated in abhorrent ways. And then we had this whole shift in the psychiatric system, rebalancing of power, moving it to the community. We'll never do this ever again. And here we are now with neurodiversity, and I'm starting to see all the hallmarks of a repeat of that abuse that happened. Yeah. I spoke to somebody recently who was sectioned, who was told they had unstable emotional personality disorder, or emotionally unstable personality disorder, whatever that is, and was put on very heavy medication, and who's recently realized that they're autistic.
Yeah.
They absolutely do not have emotionally unstable personality disorder. They do not need to be medicated. They should never have been sectioned.
Yeah.
And we're in a new era now at the moment of a repeat of some of the things that went wrong previously, it looks like. A misunderstanding of reality.
Well, again, I think psychiatry has been used as a gatekeeper against the evolution of human consciousness. And I don't say that lightly, and I mean it seriously. We know that psychiatry was used in other countries to lock away political dissidents. In our culture, it's been used to lock down individuals who have a higher soul vibrational frequency, who are waking up to the new reality that's emerging from the cosmic consciousness. The etheric energy tide is awakening souls to the higher frequencies and the higher intelligences. And the pharmaceutical stroke medical system is tasked in some way, whether it's consciously or not, to suppress individuals that are the vanguard of a new awakening in humanity. And I see this all the time. I supervise other therapists who tell me the same thing, that we have young kids, early teens, on heavy medication because they are different. There's nothing wrong with them. They're different. They don't comply with the bullshit society that wants to lock them away in classrooms, program them with information and knowledge that is useless to them for life anyway. That's the educational system in a nutshell. And they're awakened to the illusion of this reality, of Maya. And they're calling out the Wetiko mind virus. They're calling out the matrix control system that we're in. And the system itself does not want to be exposed. So our kids, our young people are being targeted in not just by the medical system with pharmaceutical drugs, but I mean the whole assault on the senses of social media and AI that is loosening the soul into these transhumanist agendas of trapping us within a simulation within a simulation. So these souls are rebellious souls. They are anarchists. They are system busters. They're here to point out that the emperor has no clothes. And when they do that, then they're assaulted and targeted and locked away or put on medication. I see this more and more all the time.
I recently started listening to the Telepathy Tapes podcast after you mentioned it in our last podcast episode. And I found it hugely interesting, first of all, just because it's a fascinating topic and what they're sharing it's kind of groundbreaking in lots of ways.
Yeah.
But more than that, I guess I started to click a few things together because, I feel like sometimes living in this middle world is like having your eyes covered, and waking up isn't a kind of uncovering, but slowly trying to get more of the picture because there's so many obstacles, there's so many opportunities to try to stop you from seeing reality. And what was shared in this podcast, insofar as I've listened to it so far, it is incredibly interesting from an evolutionary point of view, because it talks about non-speaking or non-verbal autistic kids who, for the most part are seen by society to be less than, to be disabled, to be challenged in some way, to need kind of like high levels of care, deemed like the health secretary in the US said after Trump got back into power, these kids will never pay taxes, sort of thing. Which is kind of an abominable statement because it really shows the hand of capitalism. And what's shown or what's shared in this podcast is kind of like a totally different perspective. It's actually positioning these kids as having a kind of a gift or a talent, or I even find those words a little bit challenging because it kind of smacks of specialness, and I don't think that's what it's about. Or having a superpower, which is a poorer term as well, but more about how humans could potentially evolve. It's almost like what I was picking up from it was that we're at a point in evolution where there's a kind of a thing of actually talking is really inefficient.
Absolutely.
Using our voice boxes is a really inefficient way of communicating. And this is kind of, like you said, these are kind of like the vanguard of this next phase of human beings, because if we can communicate telepathically, which it's tested and proven that these kids have like between a 95 and 100% accuracy of being telepathic, which is extraordinary. Then I'm fascinated to think about what is the world, if we're still here, if we don't destroy this planet, going to be like in another 50 or 100 years.
Well, you see, where these children come from originally in terms of their soul is very advanced meta-civilization. These souls come from a meta-civilization in other densities, in other realities, other dimensions, where the mode of communication is telepathic. As you say, and I agree with you, speaking is very inefficient in terms of communicating. And it just shows the level that humanity here is at the moment, that we still use our voice box, as you say. But advanced civilizations and advanced species, which they are out there and they are here, you can call them what you like, they communicate telepathically. And that's the norm in those meta-civilizations or meta-species. So these kids are coming in here. That is their normal way of being, the normal way of communicating. So they incarnate in here into third density, which is a huge sacrifice for them, to lower their frequency and their vibration in order to exist in a third density reality. And we might ask ourselves the question, why do they do that? Well, there's a sense that they do that in order to act as missionaries, to awaken those of us who have a sense of this. Like when we talk about the advancement of humanity or humanity's evolution, we can't use humanity as an umbrella term. There are certain percentages, small percentage of humanity are in the process of awakening and they have spirit and soul. There's another percentage that have spirit and soul and they're in a process, they're asleep, but they have potential. But the vast majority of humanity does not fit those criteria. They're dead, as Rudolf Steiner spoke about. They have no sense of solar spirit, and they have no sense of what's beyond their everyday programming. So there are levels of awakening in the human being, in the human species. And the ones who are going to graduate to the next level of vibrational frequency in other realms will be communicating telepathically, will be using extrasensory perceptions, will have the abilities that these kids have, because that's the norm at fourth density or fifth density. That's the way things are there. We are locked into, and deliberately so, into a lower vibrational prison frequency here, where all of these kind of psychic abilities that we all possess in potential, by the way, are locked down. They are made redundant in many cases, and we're castigated or made to be weird, as opposed to the military industrial complex and other organizations who are actively using remote viewing, telepathy, and psychic abilities in operatives to spy on each other. So it's not like the powers that be don't know that the powers that we have, of course they do, but they don't want you or I or the rest of the population to awaken to these experiences and to be able to use our higher senses or super senses. So the kids are normal. The rest of us are the abnormal ones. I think it's abnormal not to be able to have extrasensory perception and to have telepathic abilities. I think in the past, humanity did have those abilities. When you look at the cycles I spoke about earlier on, the Kali Yuga, when we were in the Satya Yuga, which is the golden age, read the Rig Vedas, read the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, all communication was done 25, 30,000 years ago telepathically. They were able to levitate buildings with sound. You know, it's all there. And you can look on those historical accounts as mythology, but then you begin to realize that maybe this wasn't just about mythology. Maybe they were describing a history that we've forgotten about, and lost civilizations had the abilities. And so these kids are returning around the cycle as we come out of the dark ages now and move towards the Dwapara Yuga and the higher consciousness. These kids are coming in to elevate the collective human consciousness, and then one day we'll all be communicating telepathically again.
I mean, it really spins the head on a lot of things, because if you think about, because I think there is a direct overlap to what we were talking about previously here about how things get pathologized. So medicine and psychiatry has really pathologized things like people hearing voices in their head, people seeing things, and it really now brings into question everything that we thought, I use the royal we here, that we thought was pathology or ill health. I'm really starting to question myself. Oh, actually, maybe we got all of that wrong.
I agree.
It's very likely that these were early entrants of what maybe is seen to be slightly more acceptable now. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure you and I are quite open-minded and awake people. I'm sure there's lots of people out there that might listen to this and just think, oh, there's no way that telepathy is a real thing. And it's just like, well, it's not about whether you believe in it or not. Listen to this podcast. The evidence is there.
And, you know, I agree with you. I don't believe in the concept of mental illness anymore. I didn't when I was a nurse back in the day. I certainly don't anymore. When I work with people now who say they're hearing voices, I believe them. They're hearing voices. I had a young man here last week who's been through in and out of the psychiatric system, diagnosed schizophrenic, psychotic, all the rest of it. And so I listened to him, I listened to his story, and then I introduced him to the concept of Wetiko, the parasitic mind virus that enters into our energetic field and implants negative thoughts and feelings in our mind. And, you know, his voice, and I spoke to it. I mean, it was female voice telling him to do self-destructive things to himself, and reminds me of the work of psychologist Jerry Merzinski and the Dr. William J. Baldwin, who took their patients seriously and listened to the fact that they were hearing voices and discovered that these voices were either earthbound souls or negative human intelligence, NHIs, or other beings that historically we have evidence that these things have been around, and shamans talk about them as well. And when I took his story seriously, and I said to him, we explained the concept of Wetiko, you know, a very interesting conversation happened with it. The voice in his head spoke through him and said, I've been telling you this all along. You're not, it's real. I am real. And this was speaking from him to me. And I says to him, be careful now that it doesn't now use the fact that I have pointed this out to say that it's right about everything else. So what we did was we took the voice seriously. We had a dialogue with it and exposed its agenda. And he went away out of here, not cured, but certainly relieved that what he had believed about himself all along, his baser instincts, his intuition, his sense of himself was true. And he met somebody here who was as crazy as he was, and therefore was able to enter into his world. And we neutralized the voice in terms of it telling him that he was crazy and he needed to be locked up in psychiatric hospitals, which it was telling them to do. And that's not the first time that's happened. And I find more and more when I meet the person where they're at and say, right, you know, I'm taking the voice seriously, as if it is an external voice outside of your head, not in your mind, and we can do something about that. And if you read William J. Baldwin's work, Lost Souls, Search for Lost Souls, and Jerry Merzinski's book, Adventures of the Psychotic Mind, it's mind-blowing. It's fascinating, particularly because his intervention works. And he worked in the psychiatric system and the prison system in America, and a lot of the patients that he treated in this way got better, and the voices did stop. So I agree with you. The whole concept of mental illness and the DSM-1, DSM-2, DSM-5, they just keep adding new things in there. And now they have the whole neurodivergent thing going on because they can sell medication. They can drug the children even younger now and target them and shut their souls down so they don't awaken. So it's a scam. And it's like, it's something that is actually horrendously Machiavellian to see what they're doing to these kids who were in a process of awakening and shutting them down. But then also as you rightly say, abusing them. This system is an instrument of torture in many instances. I saw it. 35 years in the system. I'm not talking about somebody who doesn't know what's going on. I was in it. I saw it. And it doesn't encourage people to be well or to heal or to embrace their gifts. And you end up seeing people walk around like zombies because they're over-medicated and the soul and spirit shut down. Remember Rudolf Steiner said this. He said there will come a time in human history where the medical doctors will be tasked by the system to use medication to cut humanity off from its spiritual source. That was back in 1917, I think he said. And we can see now in psychiatry, but also in recent times over the last 5 years, how medications and some of these so-called autistic children have gotten early childhood medications, we all know what they are, that have resulted in an increase in autism, as they call it, and other conditions. So we have to have the courage to look at that. Unfortunately, there are many courageous doctors out there who are doing it, who are really looking into what's behind the whole system, and they're naming it, and they're coming forward. Now they're often getting castigated by it, but there are a lot of doctors now waking up to this realization that it's an abusive situation and that there's nothing wrong with these kids. They're just different.
Yeah, it feels like at the moment, like sitting here in 2025 from where I'm sitting, that we're in a huge moment of destabilization globally on a geopolitical level. We're on a huge shift in understanding humans and our consciousness. And I'm a kid of the 80s, just about. I really grew up in the 90s. And I think I grew up in some sort of alternate universe to the one that we're living in today, because I remember growing up in the 90s thinking, this is a great place. My life is going to be wonderful. You know, Ireland had just joined the European Union. There was plenty of money around. Everything seemed kind of rosy in the garden and the world was at peace. And you fast forward now 35 years and it feels like we're in a big moment of kind of destruction. I think of that Hindu god of destruction. Is her name Kali?
Kali, yeah.
And it feels like, because destruction can be seen as a negative thing, but it feels almost like transformative.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Kali there, and the Kali Yuga that we've just exited recently is the Dark Ages. They call it the Iron Age. And it's a time in human history. And if you read back on accounts from the Kali Yuga, it was around before time of corruption, it's time of evil, destruction, egotism, lack of love and compassion and kindness, and it's all about greed and avarice. That's the Kali Yuga time. Now, we've been in the Kali Yuga for most of modern human history. And then as we leave it now, we move towards the what they call the Dwapara Yuga, which is a more enlightened, lighter energy, as we move towards the Treta Yuga and then the Satya Yuga. There's a very good book out called the Yuga Shift, if anybody's interested in studying this. Now, what this author, B.B. Masuri, I think it was an Indian guy, is saying that there's our cosmic cycles that come and go, full cycle around 26,800 years, and 6,000 year segments of that are the different yugas. What he says now that as we exit the Kali Yuga, the irony is the corrupt one, there's always a 300-year period of purging and redemption and purification. And he says there's where we are now, that's what we're moving into now, that humanity will have to go through a collective shadow work to face all their karma on a personal level, but also on a collective level. And as a species, we will have to be purged of our lower, egocentric, corrupt energies. We don't have to look too far to see that is a truth today. And then we will arise out of the ashes, phoenix-like, to emerge into another level and another state of consciousness. But he does say, and he quotes a lot of the old prophecies from the Hopis to the Bible to the Hindus to the Buddhists, that there have been, these cycles have come and gone before, and there were advanced medical civilizations on this planet in the past, which they're now, like people like Graham Hancock and others, are now beginning to discover is true. So therefore, what we have to look at too as a species is we have to look at our mortality. We have to look at, as an individual, we have to look at death as a teacher, as an ally, as Castaneda would say. And I find that when you keep your death on your left shoulder as an ally, it soon sobers you up to what's most important in your life. And I teach that on the Death, Rebirth and Afterlife workshop I do here in the Shamanic Practitioners Training. And people, that's the one workshop people want to repeat most, because we never get the chance to really discuss the fact that it's all very well here on the civilization, there's culture and there's things are happening, but we're all going to die. We're all going to leave this physical body and we're going to go into the spirit realms and we're going back to the other realities. And it will depend on a vibrational frequency where we go to and what density and what frequency afterwards. If we lived a very corrupted life, in generating a lot of karma, we're going to be too heavy to go to the lighter realms. So, as I say to myself and other people I work with now, the most important thing in our lives is to set your compass towards the spiritual, to recognize the corruption and darkness of the Wetiko mind virus, the parasitic mind virus that is at play in ourselves individually and also as a culture. And when you see the depth and darkness of the corruption and darkness and evil, then you will do anything to move away from that and to raise your vibration of free. You'll do your inner work. You'll do your shadow work. You'll stop projecting. Stop blaming the world for everything else, because there are no excuses taken at the end. When you look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead or the Bardo Toda, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we don't, and I got this on a journey one time, the only judgments are those you place it upon yourself. When we die and we're out of the physical realm, we're exposed fully to our unconscious, to ourselves. We're naked in the presence of pure consciousness. And at that point, we realize how much we have orientated ourselves towards the light or away from the light. And there can be huge regret then, because you realize that you fucked up. You went purely for egocentric concerns and you harmed other people. You hurt other people. Whether you thought you were doing the right thing, these psychiatry who are hurting and abusing people, they will pay the price for that. And the very ones that are abusing and hurting are the ones that are going to be ascending to the higher realms. So we may be facing, as a collective, as a human species, a cataclysmic event in the not too distant future that will purge the negativity of this world. So as we see the world descend more into wars and conflicts and struggles and difficulties between people, we have to keep in mind that we may be moving towards a purging event. So therefore, on an individual level, it's not so much whether you're diagnosed as schizophrenic or neurodivergent or whatever, you're triggered by this, that, or the other. There's no excuses taken in the realm of spirit. Do your own inner work is the message. Push through your shadow issues. Do good for the world, as you're doing, as I'm trying to do. And then you realize from that perspective, every day is special. Every moment is a gift. And every time we have an awakening moment, or we have the delight of exposing more of our shadow to ourselves because we know we can heal it and raise our frequency, that's the joy and the bliss and the ecstasy of life. That's the only thing that matters. And whatever else we think we are, as an individual or a species, that can all go in a flash. The only thing we're left with is our soul, is our spirit. That's eternal. That's returning to source, to the creator of all. And that's the only thing that matters in terms of us putting our focus and our emphasis on in our daily lives.
I think it's so important to remember that every moment is special. Life is short. And the quote that you shared when I did some training with you has always stuck with me, which is that those who die before they die don't die when they die. There's something about the message in that that's super important. Yeah,
that's the ego death of letting go of the things that no longer serve us. So that when we actually face death, we're not burdened by unfinished business, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross spoke about, or we don't have regrets. And if you look at the studies they did with people who were dying on their deathbed confessions, they never had regrets. They didn't work more, make more money or whatever. Their regrets were that they were more kind, compassionate, loving and caring to others and themselves, and they didn't spend more time in nature or the joyful things of life. See, we're conditioned by this trauma-induced matrix control system to waste all our valuable and precious times on things that don't serve us. Make a lot of money, get status, rise up the ladder of success only to find us up against the wrong wall. We sell our souls for things that we can't take out of this realm with us. We can't take material things. The only thing we take with us is what we've learned, what we've grown into, our frequency and our vibration. And that's enduring. We take that from lifetime to lifetime or dimension to dimension. And that's a store of knowledge and beauty and information and awakening. Like the things we talked about earlier about, the ability to be telepathic or have extrasensory perception. That's a given in where we're going to. So we might as well train ourselves where we're here to be able to do that over there. And this was shamans always knew and shamans always did. That's why they didn't fear death. Because they're journeying into the other worlds. You know yourself from doing shamanic journeys, you journey into other realms, into other worlds, meet spirit guides. That's where we go after we die. So those who die before they die don't die when they die because they've already done the dying in terms of ego death and have the rebirth in the psychological sense in the everyday life.
What's your parting sentiment, Martin?
My parting sentiment is that the creator of all, the cosmic consciousness, is real. It has involuted itself into being me, you, the trees, the oceans, the rivers, everything. It is everything. There is only one great soul, spirit. And we're here having different experiences of itself, being itself. And there are choices to be made, whether we're STO or STS. Are you going to be service to others or service to self? Are you going to align yourself with the AI transhumanist looshing of the soul into the machine for convenience because it's the easy way, but it becomes the hard way in the long term because your soul is trapped there for eternity in the eighth sphere, as Steiner called it? Or are you going to align yourself to service to others, which is about kindness, compassion, empathy, love? Are you going to fight for justice in terms of helping others that are less fortunate than you? Are you going to have the courage to step up, stand out, and speak out about the truth as you know it? And to challenge corruption and challenge lies, challenge falsehoods, and help others awaken. You can't wake other people up, and we don't have the right to wake others up either. But we can plant a seed in their soul that will awaken maybe later on in this lifetime or in another lifetime. And you've done something beautiful there. You've done something special. But above all, we need to work on ourselves. We're not above any of this. In fact, the alchemical engagement with our own woundedness and exposing our own shadow into the light is what propels our individuation process to higher vibrational frequencies. So we're all in the same game. We're all in the boat together here. We help ourselves, we help others, we help all. So that's what I would say, is to be loving kindness and caring and have courage, because we're going to need a lot of courage in the coming times. But if you have a sense of yourself, you know who you are at a soul and spirit level, that you're an aspect of the Creator, then you will have courage, because you will know that's the only game in town. And you know you will do anything to return to source. You will do anything to avoid the opposite, which is being trapped in a simulated reality run by AI.
And a question for our next guest?
Question for the next guest would be if they're to journey to their future selves, which is something we do on the shamanic courses here, and have a conversation with the older 90-year-old man or woman that they will become in the perfect version of themselves, getting ready to die and cross into the afterlife. What do they think that advice would be from their older selves in terms of what they need to change in their lives now to get to that place?
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. Pleasure as always.
Yes, you're a great interviewer. I love your questions. And it's great that we're tuned into the same kind of frequencies, because we can go to those places that we went to today. And that's amazing. I love that.
Thank you for listening. I'm curious about what this conversation has stimulated for you. Thoughts, feelings, curiosity. If this episode intrigued you, hit follow to be notified about new episodes. I know these conversations are valuable to me, and if you think they're valuable too, please do leave a review. Leaving a review allows more people to discover the podcast. You can scroll down to ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and click write a review. You can also connect with Becoming You on Instagram and TikTok by searching the handle at becoming_you__. The links are in the show notes too. You can also visit www.becomingyou.ie to explore the idea of becoming yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.